how, at Oliver Elliott, do we put a company into liquidation? How do we onboard the client? And so on. Well, the starting point is before we can actually pick up a pen and take on a client, we have to validate, verify your identity. So, for example, there'll be certain documents that we will request, such as, for instance, your passport, your driving license. The purpose behind the passport is to demonstrate, by way of a photographic identity document, what you look like, and that we can match your name, date of birth, with other documents. As far as your driving license is concerned, that will have similar information, including typically an address for you. But if you don't have those documents, don't worry. There are other documents that we can use, council tax, bank statement, and hopefully some other photographic ID scattered around that you can lay your hands on that we can make use of, and so on. So that's the starting point. We now have to verify and validate exactly who we're dealing with. This is part of money laundering regulations, is part of all the regulations associated with things like the Process of Crime Act and so on. That's the starting point. We can't take you on until we've done what's known as this customer due diligence. So just as you will perhaps looked on our website, you'll see who we are. You might have seen a picture of me, for instance, and you can see a picture of me now, and so on. So that's the start. The next stage in placing the company into liquidation is the formality of engagement. So we will generate for you engagement letter, which will set out all the terms of business, the price, quotation, disbursements, etc. Alongside that, there'll be an advice letter if we're putting the company into what's typically known as creditors voluntary liquidation for the bulk of insolvent liquidations, which will probably be the majority of the type of instructions that we would undertake. And that will say things like can't accept credit, and the name of the company, stop trading, etc. And there'll also be a board minute. Now, once all that's signed, and once we've validated your identity, the next stage we'll issue the invoice, and the next stage we'll ask for payment, and we will also ask for evidence of where the payment came from, typically something like a bank statement showing proof of funds, etc. Once all that's done, we will then effectively start the process of preparing 2 key documents which you need in order to put a company into creditors voluntary liquidation. That document, to start with, is the statement of affairs, which is a fundamental document that has to be filed at Companies House upon the appointment of the liquidator, which sets out the assets, the liabilities, names of the creditors, the amounts they're owed, typically their addresses, and the same for the shareholders, except it won't be what they're owed, it will be the level of their shareholding. That's the statement of affairs. Coupled with that will be a document that will be circularised amongst the creditors alongside it, known as the SIP 6 report to creditors. It will have company information, it will have an explanation as to why the company is going into liquidation, and it will have a reconciliation for the last accounts to the statement of affairs to show what has happened, to explain the position in the last accounts and what has happened to go down for the company to go into liquidation. It'd be quite rare, but it could happen that there would be a profit, but the company was still going into liquidation for some other reason. But normally there would be some sort of a trading loss, asset write-downs and things of that sort. We will then send those documents off to the creditors. A notice will be published in the London Gazette, typically convening what's known as a virtual online creditors meeting. It doesn't have to be done this way. It can also be done by what's known as deemed consent procedure, but very commonly we will do it by a virtual meeting, and then there will be the meeting of the company. in which the company formally passes a resolution by 75% or more of the shareholders or the voting shareholders, depending on whether it's a written resolution or whether it is being done by way of a meeting. We would typically convene a formal meeting of the company for it to be a voting basis for going into liquidation rather than a written resolution. And of course there will be the creditors meeting, the virtual meeting that I referred to, in which the creditors will then have the opportunity to ratify the appointment of the liquidator or alternatively pick somebody else. Now, once all that's been swept aside and dealt with, then the company will actually be in liquidation. Somebody like myself or another insolvency practitioner will be appointed as liquidator, and the director will have lost their powers under Section 103 of the Insolvency Act, and the company will then be under the control of the liquidator. And that's how we onboard clients to put them into liquidation so that they can deal with their insolvent position.